She had been sitting at the edge of the highway on ramp for 2 days before Lucas Holt noticed her. Not sitting the way a dog sits when it is waiting for something, sitting the way a dog sits when it has stopped expecting anything and has settled into the cold as a permanent condition. She was a black shepherd mix, 11 years old by the look of her, with a gray muzzle and cataracts that had turned her eyes to the color of clouded glass. Her right hindquarter bore an old scar from a vehicle strike that had healed wrong. She was not a military working dog. She was not a trained anything. She was an old blind dog sitting in December snow on the shoulder of Highway 191 outside Bozeman, Montana, and she was going to die there if he didn't stop. He stopped. He didn't think about it. There was no calculus. He simply pulled over, walked to her, and put his hand under her chin, and she turned her clouded eyes toward the warmth of him and exhaled. The long, surrendering exhale of a creature that has been alone in the cold long enough to have accepted it and has just been surprised by something different. He didn't know yet what he was taking home. He would understand it before the month was out. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. We read every single comment, what a blind old dog found in the snow, and what she found for the man who saved her, is the kind of story that we believe God puts in our path for a reason. Don't leave before you hear it all. Senior Chief Petty Officer Lucas Holt, retired, was 44 years old and had the face of someone who had been made of something hard and had been working, slowly, at becoming something less hard without being certain he had the right tools for the job. He was 6'1", 190, with dark hair that had gone fully silver at the temples in the 2 years since his last deployment, and a jaw that had never been designed for softness and had long since stopped trying. His eyes were a steady, specific brown, not the warm brown of someone at ease, but the particular brown of someone who is always watching the room from behind a surface that does not show the watching. He had been, for 19 years, a Navy SEAL with Naval Special Warfare Command, with 4 deployments, Fallujah in 2007, Kandahar twice, and a 4th rotation in Syria in 2020 that had produced a silver star in a right shoulder that had been reconstructed and would never quite be what it was. He had completed his service, not discharged, there was a difference he was precise about, and had moved to Bozeman, Montana, because his ex-wife had moved there first, and Lily was there, and Lily was the reason for most of his decisions. Though he had not always been able to show that in the way she needed it shown. He was not a man who was good at the things that mattered most and didn't leave marks. Lily was 16. She had been missing for 5 months. She had left in July, the week after Lucas came home from Syria, in a manner that the Bozeman PD described as a voluntary departure, and that Lucas understood, with the specific grief of a father who has been absent for most of the formative years of a daughter's life, as a message he had been receiving for a long time and had not known how to answer. He had filed a report. He had hired a private investigator. He had driven every road between Bozeman and Missoula 3 times. He had not found her. He had come home each time to a house that was too quiet and a right shoulder that ached in the cold and the specific weight of being a man who could locate a target in a foreign country in the dark and could not find his own daughter in the same city. He had taken the dog home because he needed something alive in the house, and because she was going to die otherwise, and because stopping was the only thing he knew how to do without thinking. He named her Sadie. Sadie was 11 years old and 61 pounds, with a coat that had once been rich black and had gone to the mixed iron gray of her muzzle and chest, black above, gray beneath, like snow settling on dark ground. Her cataracts had rendered her entirely blind in her left eye and nearly so in her right. The scar on her hindquarter had left a slight hitch in her back left gait, a rhythmic compensation that she had perfected into something almost graceful. The walk of an animal that has made peace with a limitation and built its life around it. She did not move with the clean authority of a trained working dog. She moved with the particular unhurried carefulness of a creature that has learned to navigate by what remains when sight is gone, the geometry of smell, the specific information of air pressure and sound, the warmth that tells her where a wall is, and the cold that tells her where an opening appears. She navigated Lucas's house within 24 hours of arrival, mapping it completely in a single pass and never bumping into anything again. He watched her do this and felt something he had not felt in a long time: admiration. The Gallatin Valley in December was the kind of landscape that honest mountains produce, everything else taken away, the essential shape of the world laid bare under the snow that lay thick and silent across the valley floor and up into the timber. The air had the specific quality of high-altitude winter cold, not just temperature, but density, the kind that makes each breath feel like information about the atmosphere's intentions. The sky in the evenings was the color of old pewter, and the nights were deep, and the only sound from Lucas's house on the edge of town was the wind off the Spanish peaks and, occasionally, the particular soft sound of a blind old shepherd moving through a room she had memorized. He carried Lily's flannel shirt in the cab of his truck. He had been carrying it for 5 months. It was the last piece of clothing she had left in her room when she went. He didn't know why he carried it. He was not a sentimental man by habit. He carried it because not carrying it had been impossible to imagine the one time he tried. On the 11th day after he brought Sadie home, he left the shirt on the bench seat while he was inside a gas station, and when he came back out, Sadie had her face buried in the flannel with the complete, committed attention of an animal that has found the most important thing in the room. Her nose worked in the specific deep rhythm that a dog's nose works when it is not sampling but reading. The extended, deliberate inhalation of something that requires full attention. She lifted her head. She was looking, as much as a blind dog looks, in the direction of South Bozeman. Lucas stood beside the truck and watched her. Sadie turned to the direction of South Bozeman, and she stayed there. Her nose moved at the air. Her ears rotated forward, the specific posture of a dog that has found a thread and is following it in her mind before her body follows. Lucas put her on the leash. He followed her out of the parking lot. He didn't understand what he was doing. He understood that she knew something he didn't, and that she was going somewhere, and that he was the one who had brought her here. He had spent 19 years following information his body collected before his mind processed it. He understood the specific competence of an organism reading its environment. He did not question what Sadie was reading. He followed. She walked with a careful, deliberate attention she brought to all movement. The compensation in her hindquarter working its rhythm, her nose processing the air at a rate he could see in the way it moved, fast, then slow, then fast again as she hit the trail and followed it or lost it and searched. She walked the way someone walks when they have a destination rather than a direction, not in a straight line, but with a series of course corrections that a scent trail requires, checking, confirming, adjusting. Twice she stopped and turned her head and recalibrated. Both times she found the thread again. He walked with her. He did not know what they were looking for. He held the leash loose, the way you hold a leash when you want to stay connected to something without controlling it. 9 blocks south, 3 blocks east, past a laundromat and a convenience store, and a block of residential houses that went quiet in the afternoon, and a vacant lot that had snow across it undisturbed. The city had that particular December sound, traffic muted, birds absent, everything flattened by cold and cloud cover into a silence that felt like it was waiting. Sadie stopped at the sidewalk facing a converted commercial building on the edge of a residential neighborhood with a hand-painted sign that said Cornerstone Youth Transition Services and a second sign below it that said all are welcome in a font that had been designed to seem warm and had achieved something adjacent to it without quite arriving. The building smelled of floor wax and institutional bleach and the faint sweetness of a kitchen that cooked in volume. It was 3 in the afternoon. There were lights on. Sadie stood with her clouded eyes forward and her nose pointed at the front door with the complete, patient certainty of an animal that has reached the end of the thread and is now waiting for the human to take it from here. Her ears were slightly forward. Her body was still. She was not alert in the way that a threat produces alertness. She was settled. She had found the thing she was looking for. The rest was not her job. Lucas looked at the building for a long moment. Then he looked at Sadie. Then he looked at the building again. He had not known this building existed. He had driven South Bozeman 6 times in 5 months. He had not come this way. He would not have come this way. He did not know what had brought him to this gas station on this morning with this dog, except that she had needed a ride 2 weeks ago and he had stopped. Clifton Marsh was 39 years old and ran Cornerstone Youth Transition Services on a combination of state grant funding, a federal runaway youth services allocation, and the private donations of 14 individuals who believed they were funding a legitimate transitional housing program for at-risk teenagers. He had, in fact, been running a legitimate program for the first 2 years, and the program had done real good, which was the foundation upon which he had built everything that came afterward. He was plausible in the way that people who have been trusted for a long time become plausible. The ease of someone who has stopped worrying about scrutiny because scrutiny has never arrived. He was a clean-cut man with a kind face and a practiced sincerity, and he was very good at appearing to care about the young people in his program, and he was also charging them through a series of program fee deductions from a mandatory work placement component. Approximately 60% of the wages they earned at partner businesses that he received kickbacks from. He had been doing this for 3 years. 11 young people had cycled through the program. None of them had felt safe enough or connected enough to anyone outside the program to file a complaint. Lily was 16 and had been missing for 5 months. The relevant fact about Lily, the fact that Lucas returned to every time he thought about her, was not that she had run, but what she had run with. She had taken her books and her journal and the money she had been saving from her part-time job at the coffee shop, and she had organized her departure over what must have been weeks, because she had not left impulsively, and she had not left in distress, and she had left a note that was 3 sentences long and entirely clear, and which Lucas had read so many times that he had it memorized without ever intending to. I love you. I need to figure out who I am when you're not deployed, and I'm not waiting. I'll come back when I know. She was 16 and she had known herself well enough to write those 3 sentences, and that was the thing about Lily that Lucas came back to. When the searching got dark, she was a person who knew what she needed and had gone to find it, which was a quality he recognized and had not given her enough credit for. She had ended up at Cornerstone because a woman at a Bozeman shelter had told her it was a good place for young people who needed stability while they figured things out. The woman had not been wrong about what the program claimed to be. She had been wrong about what it was. Lily had been there for 3 months. She had not called Lucas because she had not known what to say to him, and because the facility's policy on outside communication was restrictive in ways she had only gradually understood were restrictive, initially framed as structure for recovery, then defended as necessary boundaries, and finally revealed when she asked directly as a policy that Clifton Marsh enforced without explanation, because explanation would have required justification. She had been working 22 hours a week at a grocery distribution warehouse. She had been receiving a printed voucher for the work rather than actual wages. She had been told the vouchers could be redeemed at the program store, which sold items at 2 to 3 times their retail value. She had been by the time Lucas stood on the sidewalk across the street, quietly and methodically building a case for leaving again, because Lily was her father's daughter, and she did not stop until she understood a thing completely. She had not yet found a way out that felt safe. Lucas did not go inside that afternoon. He sat in his truck across the street for 90 minutes watching the building, and he made 3 calls. The first was to the Bozeman PD runaway unit, which he had a contact at by name. The second was to a former Army intelligence officer he had served adjacent to in Syria, who was now with a nonprofit specializing in youth exploitation investigations, and who, when Lucas described the program and its name, pulled up a file that already had Cornerstone on it, flagged but unacted upon. The third call was to his ex-wife, who had not spoken to him in 4 months, and who picked up on the second ring, and to whom he said only, "I found her. I think she's okay. I need you to come." Sadie sat in the passenger seat through all 3 calls. She was facing forward, her nose occasionally lifting at some information the air was carrying to her. Her tail moved once or twice in the slow, deliberate way that tails move when an animal has settled into a situation it understands. Lucas had not thought about what she could smell through a closed window and across a street. He did not think about it then. He thought about Lily, on the other side of that door, and what she would need from him that he had not yet figured out how to give. He would figure it out. He had to. The following morning, Clifton Marsh arrived at Cornerstone at 7:45 to find a Gallatin County Sheriff's vehicle, a Montana Department of Justice child welfare investigator, and a woman from the state nonprofit oversight office standing in the lobby with paperwork that had been authorized on an emergency basis the previous evening. Lucas stood across the street with Sadie at his side. He did not go inside. He didn't need to go inside. He had made his calls. He had given them what the intelligence contact had provided: the wage diversion documentation, the communication restriction policy, the kickback agreements with the partner businesses, and they had done the rest. Marsh came out of the building at 9:15. He was not wearing his practiced sincerity. He had the expression of a man who had built something on the assumption that the ground was solid, and had discovered at the moment the ground gave way that the difference between safety and exposure had always been someone deciding to look. Nobody had decided to look until now. He had spent 3 years in the space that creates, the space between what is documented and what is investigated. He would not be spending a 4th year there. The 8 young people inside the building were interviewed by a child welfare team through the morning. 7 of them had families who were notified within the day. 2 social workers stayed through the afternoon. By evening, the building that had called itself a place of welcome had become a place of accounting, which is different and necessary. Marsh was cited on 14 counts of financial exploitation of a minor and 1 count of operating a youth services program without proper state oversight certification. The state investigation that followed over the next 4 months identified 8 additional young people whose wages had been diverted and documented $91,000 in unauthorized deductions. Marsh surrendered his nonprofit operating license. He was sentenced to 6 years and 4 months. Lily came out of the building at 10:37, wearing her own clothes, carrying a bag that did not have much in it. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked across the street. Lucas did not run to her. He walked. The shoulder ached in the December cold, and he walked anyway. And Sadie walked beside him, her nose lifted at the air, her gait the careful compensated rhythm of an animal that sees with what remains. Lily looked at the dog, then at her father. "Is that your dog?" she said. "She found me," Lucas said. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see him clearly and far enough that she could decide what to do next. "I wasn't sure I'd find you. I wasn't sure I wanted to be found," Lily said. "I know," he said. They stood on the sidewalk in the December cold, and Sadie sat between them. She turned her clouded eyes toward Lily, and she pressed her gray muzzle against the girl's hand, which hung at her side, and Lily looked down at the dog, and then she looked at her father, and something in her face moved. Not the resolution of everything, not the answer to 5 months and the years before them, but the beginning of the willingness to try. Sadie's tail began to wag. Slow, deliberate, sure, 4 months later, Lucas and Lily were in Bozeman together, which was not a simple thing and was not a thing that had fixed itself, but was a thing that was being worked on with the specific effort of two people who have decided that the relationship is worth the cost of being honest about how damaged it is. Lily was seeing a counselor, which had been her condition and his agreement. He was seeing one too, which had been her ask, and which he had found harder than most things he had been asked to do in 19 years of service, and more necessary. The three of them drove out toward the Gallatin River on Sundays, when the weather permitted, and Sadie walked the riverbank in the way she walked everything, by smell, by sound, by the warmth of the sun on one side of her face when it was out, navigating precisely and without self-pity through a world she could not see. Clifton Marsh's program was closed. The state rebuilt its youth services certification process to include mandatory unannounced inspections. The 14 donors who had funded Cornerstone received a full accounting and were given the opportunity to redirect their contributions to a legitimate organization, 12 of whom did. Lily was home. Sadie slept at the foot of the bed. She had been doing this since December, when Lucas had pulled over on a highway on Ramp and put his hand under the chin of an old blind dog sitting in the snow, and she had turned her clouded eyes toward him and exhaled. Sometimes God does not send the guide we expect. Sometimes he sends an 11-year-old blind shepherd with a hitch in her gait and cataracts like sea glass, and she leads you 9 blocks and 3 blocks east to a door you would not have found any other way. We are in the habit of believing that sight is required for direction, that strength is required for leadership, that the guide must be impressive before we will follow. But sometimes the most important truth about a situation is carried not in what can be seen, but in what can be smelled, in the invisible record of a person's presence, the trace that love leaves in the air long after it has moved on. Sadie could not see where she was going. She went anyway. She found what she was looking for. She stood at the end of the thread and waited for the human to catch up. God places the right guide in our path at the right moment, and the guide is not always what we imagined. Sometimes it is old and blind and sitting in the snow. Sometimes it has already given everything it had to give and still has something left, something that turns out to be exactly what was needed. If this story touched you, if it gave you something you needed today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever been led somewhere you needed to go by something you didn't expect? We'd like to hear that. And if you believe that love finds its way even through the darkest winters, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, and place the right guide beside you when you cannot see the way forward.